All right. Apollo Road Podcast. Welcome, Evan Davenport.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, so we finally got another episode here. It's just been a crazy year, and trying to coordinate with people is, harder than in years past, but we're finally here.
We've only had a couple things happen in the last 10 months. I don't even know.
A couple of things every day for the last 10 months, I feel like.
I just can't even open my phone anymore because it's just another distraction from what you're trying to focus on.
I'm thinking about going where you delete all the social apps on your phone and only keep it on your computer. I've heard some people do that, and they say it's apparently, during the day it keeps things a little more focused.
I wish I could do that. Unfortunately, just for me, I need to have that interaction with people that at the fingertips, because actually I don't even own a computer.
Oh, really? You're one of those phone guys, just phone only, huh?
I don't even have internet in my house.
Damn. That's pretty, I hear that's good too.
It's been an adjustment the last few years.
Yeah.
But I think it has led me to a lot of good decisions with being able to work when I want to work and not having distractions.
Sure. Cool. Well, why don't you introduce yourself and your profession? We met through my dad, because we built you a nice metal gate and a fence, and I guess actually, so you'd worked or lived like near us in the years past, but I guess we connected just over the years, and we realized we're both craftsmen, and here we are.
That's exactly right. So I'm a violin maker, for lack of more technical terms. If you want to be specific, it's called a luthier. I have been in that for a number of years now. I started kind of experimenting with instruments and trying to manufacture them from the time I was probably single digits, maybe 7 or 8. I would get a 2x4 and a box and some string and try and make a guitar out of it. And that kind of just progressed and evolved and got to the point where I realized, hey, this is something that's actually interesting. And at that point in my life, I was really interested in music and whether that was going to be a career path as far as being a professional musician. And I realized one day that, I don't think I'm good enough to make a go at being a musician. I don't think I have the passion to become good enough to be a musician. And so I was able to kind of take a step back and say, hey, I definitely feel like I need to have music in my life, but in what parameter is that? And I realized that I think I'm actually more interested in the instruments themselves than I am actually playing them. And so being able to separate that kind of gave me a really clear mindset of how I was going to proceed. And through a number of events and people I knew, I was able to start a formal violin making apprenticeship when I was in high school.
Nice. Where was this? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up actually outside of Albuquerque.
Okay.
In the East Mountains.
Oh, wow. Like, we have some friends that were in the East Mountains, and as when I was younger, we'd like drive out there and go hang out with them. And it was always, when you're a kid, it seems like it's way the fuck out there. But now it's like you realize, I just got to go ride my mountain bike out there all the time, and it's not that far. But people in the city, or if they're not familiar with New Mexico, they think that East Mountains are like kind of like the Ozarks of Albuquerque almost. Yeah,
it kind of has this persona about it. And even growing up, there was the Albuquerque, the city kids and the mountain kids. And I don't know if there's like a perceived hierarchy, but it was definitely much so that the mountain kids were perceived differently in our mindset than the city kids were.
Cool. So were you born here now in New Mexico? Or
I was, yeah. Okay. So I was born here, grew up here, spent all my life here until I was about 19. And then after high school, I moved to Brooklyn. Okay. And I worked for a guitar shop in Brooklyn for the summer.
And is that where you kind of were looking to go down the apprenticeship path, or how you landed it out there, or was it here in New Mexico?
So the apprenticeship was here actually in New Mexico. Okay. I was super fortunate that I was able to land with a violin maker not 5 minutes from my house.
Nice.
And the number of violin makers in the world, it's not a huge number of them. So it was just the stars aligned, more or less.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's like, people probably don't really keep tabs on that as an industry, right? Because some of those like really niche specialty things, it almost seems like whenever you go to look up, how much would I get paid if I were a luthier, and how many are there? It's like there's no data, because it's just kind of one of those old school, apprentice hand the the skills and knowledge down through the generations instead of, here's your course, here's your school, here's your program, go for it, right? So it sounds like you really got on the right track.
Well, yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And I think so that's the way it was for not just violin making or luthier, but craft as it was as an entity. People had an apprenticeship or a journeyman time, and that's how people kind of learned and studied with that. I think things have changed more so in the last few years. So actually, after I had done my apprenticeships, I actually studied violin making and restoration.
Okay.
And I went to a school in Boston for that. There's a school called North Bennett Street School.
Cool.
And that school is kind of it's a trade school, but has focus on like lost arts and crafts. So from very high furniture making to locksmithing to jewelry making, bookbinding, and preservation. So
cool. That sounds almost like the Sherlock Holmes suite of skills, right?
It's
like the twirl your mustache, manly man skills. I mean, that's kind of maybe like a pejorative way to put it, but that really is. It's like when you think of those skills, it's old school, right? It's because you don't really meet that many people that do it these days.
It's true. And I think like not just being in the program at the school for violin making, that obviously had huge effect on the craftsman that I've become. But being in a program or being in a school that has multiple programs, and even though I didn't work in these other programs, I knew people in these other programs, and being able to see their work and how they progressed and how they saw shape and style, it definitely has influenced me to become more of what I am today as a craftsman.
Okay. So that's interesting because I would consider myself like, I did the informal apprenticeship under my father and still am, right? But nothing was ever like a formal education. It was like, hey, here's the MIG welder, here's the settings, here's how thick your steel is, go for it, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh shit, like I don't want to fuck this up because, it's like it might have been something that we were working on that was going to go out or whatever. But that's how I learned. And then with the stainless steel furniture, same thing. It's like, here's your welder, here's the settings, here's the basic technique, go learn it, right? So to this day, I still feel like insecure about what I know, what I supposedly know. And I mean, it's like on social media, you post images and photos and videos, and it's like, I know what I can make, but because I never had that formal stamp of approval behind it or the curriculum behind it, I'm still like, oh shit, did I do this like 100% or, so I like your perspective is that you saw all the people that went to the trade school, and you could probably, you probably know when there's good work and there's bad work, regardless of whether you went to school for it or not, right?
That is definitely, I think anybody can see good work and bad work, and just may not be to a degree of that's like quote unquote educated. But I think what you're referring to is what a lot of my friends and I used to like to call the imposter syndrome, where even though you may be totally proficient in your field, but you always feel like you're not quite there. And I think a lot of craftsmen have that feeling of like, hey, I don't know if I should be like, this is the right way to execute this stuff. And I don't know if that'll ever go away. I don't know. I think that's a good thing though, because I think it always kind of levels you into knowing that there's more to know.
Yeah, it keeps you chasing, right? Keeps you chasing, keeping those skills. Like there's one other thing you can learn. There's one new level.
Yeah.
So that's cool though. Talk more about trade school and what that was like, because I think that's like we were talking before the show. That's kind of coming back in certain aspects and.
Yeah. So for me, it was the best thing I possibly could have ever done. I was not good in a formal education. I was the kid that would never show up and then pass all the tests, but I refused to do my homework. Right. And it wasn't that I understood it. I just didn't care because I didn't see how this, in retrospect, I would have changed a lot of things, but I didn't see how this would affect me in my life. And I realized once I had realized I really wanted to work with my hands, I didn't really have any respect of like doing the formal education route. And not to knock it for other people, because I know it's for a lot of folks, it's the right path. Yeah. But for me, I just knew I had to have the tangible thing. So I obviously went to the school in Boston, and it was an incredible experience. Like, I mean, they weren't afraid to kick your ass until you do something again, and if it wasn't right, it wasn't right.
Yeah.
And I think probably one of the most enlightening things about it was you were not the only person in the room that felt that way. You were surrounded by people who were obsessing in how to be the artist or craftsman they wanted to be.
So was it like? So remind me again, how old were you when you were in that program?
So I was 19, I think,
19,
when I went there.
Okay. So at that point, it's, I feel like people kind of have an inkling of some path to follow. Was it like, were you with a bunch of like killers that were like, I'm going to be the next, Banksy, and I'm going to do the street circuit. I'm going to, branch out. Or was it people that were just there because they really like to do a certain thing with their hands?
So it was actually a combination of people. It was less common for people to have come there straight out of high school. I was kind of the anomaly in that there's only me and one other person at that time who had come to straight out of high school.
Oh, so like everyone was older.
It was
most were older.
A lot of people was like a secondary career, or even a retirement project, or a lot of retired military too. And that's not just for violin making. That was for all the programs in school. The school really prided itself on encouraging veterans to come in, which is wonderful, giving them second opportunities.
Yeah, I would imagine that the skills would transfer pretty well, just because it's so detail oriented, focused. Like learning how to build something is somewhat A to B, right? In the steps you take, and then the artistry kind of emerges in between each step, I think.
Yeah, and so that kind of leads into like a whole nother like conversation about like making something. It's in a theory, it's materials and steps, and changing different things. It's kind of like changing a recipe when you're cooking, because all it is a recipe, and you're starting with raw materials, and this is everything you want to do is in there. It's just knowing how to manipulate it to get what you want to get. And I can sit down and I can take somebody and show them the exact same way, or I can show them how I build an instrument from A to Z and show them every single step in the way, from beginning to end, and I can guarantee that their instrument will look nothing like mine.
Right.
And that's partially due to artistry, but also partially just due to the fact that our hands are so individual that we do things our own natural way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that. I know that that's the case with just with furniture. It's like all the parts are the same length each time, but there's a little character in each piece, right? And even though everything on paper is the same, your hand, performing the task each time is the same, and yet there's something about each end result that you can point to and be like, yeah, that's different than the last one, and that's different.
But I think that adds something extra to something that's handmade, because I think the Industrial Revolution was incredibly dangerous for people, for craftsmen. It changed everything from being a handmade product to a machine pumping out product. Mm-hmm. And I think more so today than it was 20 years ago that people are realizing what quality is in handmade and not asking for something that's just mass produced for the ease of production.
Right. What do you think about, like I'm torn on this topic because obviously we're both in the business of handmade, made in America. Mm-hmm. Obviously like raw materials are sourced all over the world, and that's something you can't really get around, and you can't really knock it either. Like it's, I should be proud to use materials from around the world, right? Mm-hmm. But that was kind of a tangent. But just the point is that like it's I don't know. I take it for granted, like your iPhone and recording equipment and microphones. Like I'll never ever be able to make this. I don't understand electrical engineering, wires. I'm so glad that there's a factory pumping these out, right? Mm-hmm. So that we can talk. So on one hand, it's like I'm really glad that things are kind of getting automated, and you'll never ever like this mic was $20. Like I couldn't make you anything for $20, like other than like some coasters. Like I'm like shit, like that's just economies of scale and yada yada yada, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like I'm living this dual world where I really appreciate that stuff, but I'm so glad that it makes the tools cheaper, it makes the equipment cheaper, it makes, I mean, people knock Amazon Prime, but I order tools on Amazon all the time. I order router bits, I order whatever to keep that shop running. And that's like a beautiful thing. It's like, hey, we get to now expand our skills and techniques and broaden our horizons. And it's still going into a handmade product, right?
Yeah, and I definitely agree that, living in modern day society has its pros and cons with way people work with their hands too. Mm-hmm. Like, as you said, Amazon, I mean, a huge thing too is, YouTube. Like, how incredible is YouTube? You want to know how to MIG weld, you go on YouTube and type in how to MIG weld, and in 10 minutes, you'll be a pro.
Dude, that's like when people ask me, hey, like if you ever have some time, like you want to show me how to weld? I'm like, I don't even know how to weld fully. Like, because I said I never went to school for it. You could probably do better for yourself just going on YouTube instead of asking me. It's like I go on YouTube to figure out stuff.
Yeah, and I think there are things that have probably become more populated just with the technology improving that have helped out people. But I think there also has been some drawbacks to that too, where, I mean, just a side tangent. I mean, talk about like machinery, and because it's something that I'm really interested in, machinery and tooling and things of that sort, where you have old school machinery and look at the way that stuff works and shapes and just the visual aspect of the machinery. There was design and process that went into that. So there wasn't somebody sitting there was not somebody sitting behind a computer screen just drawing on CAD. There was somebody with a pencil, and then that pencil then went to the pattern maker, and the pattern maker then made the patterns, and that went to the foundry. And I do think there are pros and cons to it. It's just different, and kind of learning how to navigate like whatever you're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think about like the automation argument? Everyone's like, oh, everything's getting automated, and cars, nobody makes cars by hand anymore. And it's hard to see the full picture, right?
I think the dream of modern society is to make everything automated, and then humans just sit back and watch it all happen.
Yeah, that's funny because I've heard somebody say, once everything's automated, the only jobs left will be creative jobs, art, literature, music, poetry, writing, whatever, right?
I think there's kind of going to be two types of people as things continue to be automated. I think there's going to be the kind of people that like to sit back and watch things happen. And then there's going to be the people that want to make things happen. And I think, as much automation as there will be, there's something, as you said, there's something to be said for somebody who makes some stuff by hand. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll just speak for myself. A computer can never do what I do, because there's so many little details that go into it because we use organic materials, and that it's not a cookie cutter. It's not every single thing is the same. I am constantly changing the way the instrument is made because of whatever the materials are. If it's a stiffer piece of wood, I'm going to maybe change the outside arching a little bit, or I'll change the inside graduations, or kind of I think it's too complicated in a nutshell to rely on an algorithm to make it in just a cookie cutter fashion.
Right. So it sounds like the intuition of you could go out into your shop, pick up a piece of wood, and know exactly where it's going to go on that piece, right?
Yes.
Based on grain, weights, like you said, like if it's heavier, if it's stiff, it's more solid, it's lighter, the color, the texture. I mean, wood. So I work with wood in a limited way. I mean, so this was done on a CNC router. I understand the basic principles of wood. Like, yeah, it has grain and it's going to warp and it's going to change. And, so I can make this, but that's with a computer and with, CNC equipment. I could make it by hand if I wanted to, but I'd be here all night. So I can't even begin to imagine the work that goes into instruments, because there's like the aspect of, okay, it's constructed, but does it sound good? Does it sound perfect? That's such a black hole to me that I don't know if you want to take a stab at that. And so I think let's start simpler. When did you first construct your first instrument? What age were you?
Well, so okay, it depends how technical we want to be about what this is.
Extremely. People have Google; they can look stuff up later.
Well, I made very rudimentary guitars when I was in high school.
Okay.
Just literally butcher block that was cut into the shape of a guitar, and I bought like pre-manufactured necks and assembled them in a less than ideal fashion. And when I look back and see them lying around various parts of my life, I cringe. And
Do you still have one of those?
maybe
Yeah. So
I
that's a
think
yes.
it may be in the firewood pile currently.
Okay.
So I was probably 13 when I made my first real instrument. But the technical extremities of how complex that was from when I was from then to what is now, it's not even the same room.
Sure.
Because it's literally a block of wood with a neck attached to it versus an acoustical instrument that's like, because these are, they're diaphragms, they're pumping and they're moving waves, and it's more of a living organism versus just a stick.
That's for sure. Just a quick side note, like I at least took for granted how much physics there is in the everyday object. Musical instruments at their core, it's just all about resonance and air flow, right? Like, I guess if you were to strip it down, there's obviously a lot more, but it's like the thing's either flowing air or it's vibrating in some way.
So it's a combination of a lot of things. But vibrations is a huge,
right.
It's a huge, that is what it is. It's the string is vibrating, and the string then translates that sound wave or the vibration through the bridge, and then the bridge down to the top of the instrument. And then the top is the main diaphragm, and that's going to, through a variable of things of how the instrument is arched on the outside versus the graduations on the inside versus the outline of the instrument, that top is going to vibrate in different ways. So probably the thing I like to compare a violin to the most, or any instrument for that matter, is a drum. Actually, people can look at a drum and they see how it works. You hit the top, the skin, and it vibrates, and the shell more or less amplifies the frequencies. And it's not too dissimilar from what happens in anything else. It's a very good visual thing to do. And you tighten the drum head and it changes in pitch. You can push the drum head down with your finger and hit it. It'll change in pitch. And they're very sensitive. And that's the same thing for what this is. So it's in a nutshell, that's what it is. But there's so many things that go into making a violin. And people just kind of assume like, oh, it's woodworking. It's like, yeah, it is woodworking. But it's also knowing how load is balanced on instruments, so architecture. It's knowing alchemy with some chemistry, because cooking varnish, like I cook my own varnish. It's tree resin with some other drying oils and solvents, and knowing how to manipulate and cooking in different manners can push it colors and the way it dries differently.
Okay, that's a new concept to me. I've never heard that before.
What's that?
Like cooking your own varnish.
Cooking your own varnish, yeah.
That's like completely, I've never even seen those words together, which is cool because it's like, oh shit, like obviously I know like you finish it in some fashion, but I've never even thought to like, what do they use? They don't just use tongue oil, right? There's like a whole process to it.
There's a whole process to it. And
it's specific to the ultimate like resonance and frequency, right? Like wouldn't it help? So actually the only like thing I can link this to is when I was playing guitar a little bit in high school, there was a kid who he was like a year older than me, and he was doing like the national like circuits because he was so freaking good. And he had this guitar that was handmade here in Albuquerque. It was was it the Pimentel Brothers? Yes, yeah. It was one of those, right? He had like a carbon fiber guitar case for it, and I remember like when you first learn guitar, right? Like you just look at the thing and you're like, okay, there's 6 strings, it's good to go. I'll tune it. But I'll never forget like learning about that kid and his guitar and the way he played, because he would do like recitals at our school, and he had to get that thing and he had to make sure it was at room temperature for a couple hours at least, so it was stable. And then he would take it out and he would tune it, and then as you tune it, it adds tension here and there, and then it changes the tune of the other strings that you just tuned, so you have to go back and tune it and keep tuning it. And that's like all before you even play the music. And also I was like, holy shit, like this is such a dynamic like you said, it's almost an organism. It freaking changes at the temperature and the light and the way you look at it and the way you hold it and if you treat it nicely. And
it's true.
And I could totally see that with constructing it. It seems way harder than just learning how to tune it and play it.
Well, and that's, in the basic principles, somebody can build their first violin, and the difference between a first violin and a world-class violin, fundamentally it's not that different. It's usually the same recipe, but it's knowing how to tweak it so it goes from being okay to being, wow, that's a stellar instrument.
What are the tweaks? I mean, I know there are probably some secrets in there that you don't want to give away, but is it like you change the way it's attached, or you change the shape of the cutouts, or you use better wood or different wood, or
it's honestly, there's so many things that go into it. It's hard to say it's one thing.
It's a combination of all of those. And
I think overall, the probably the safest thing to say is just quality. The quality of your work and everything, it will eventually lead to a better instrument. And so shape is hugely important. And I mean, a violin is, everything in the world is just shape, and it's how our eyeball visualizes what we're looking at. And I think becoming a violin maker, it's kind of led me to looking at shape in the world like in a different manner, like looking at shadows and how things are a straight line versus a curved line, because everything is a straight line and a curved line, and knowing how we use that to what we're trying to make.
Can I pick that up? Yeah. Okay. So it's the visual going along with the explanation. So I agree. Like, you're either A to B straight line, or there's like a curve or a vector or an arc in between, or a combination. So like, if you were to change, let's say, if you were to change the top shape, because it's the top smaller than the bottom volume wise, I'm assuming that has to do with the airflow, maybe.
So it's actually not. It's they are the same size,
really,
volume wise. It's just it's probably a visual trick based off the color of the wood currently. The tops actually tend to have a little more height in the arch, so arguably they may have a little more volume.
Okay.
And volume is a factor with it. So the thickness of how wide the instrument is and how much air it's pumping out can change the resonant frequencies inside the instrument.
Is there a standard? Like, is there a standard that you start from, or is it
there's
like regulation, right? Like, if you're going to make a violin for a symphony orchestra, it needs to be these dimensions and have this sort of certain template.
So there's no like formal, like, this is the number and you go from there. It's kind of just what's been evolved over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years.
It's probably good, right? Gives you a little freedom, a little flexibility, and
within reason. So
yeah.
So there's okay. So this is going to lead to a tangent. So every number of years, someone comes around and they have an idea like, oh, I'm going to reinvent the violin because I can make it better. And it's usually a professor or a musician that's incredibly successful. Right. And they have an idea because they cracked the code on how a violin works.
They're thinking they want a
little extra money,
little copyright deal, right? That's what they're thinking.
And I wish it was that way, but there's a reason why the violin has not changed in basic principle for over 400 years. And
actually, that's a good maybe point. Is I was briefly looking up on Wikipedia, like, first violin, and it was like something like 1500s. Is that? Yeah.
So the first violins kind of started showing up. I mean, and I'm not a historian, so don't quote me on any of this, but definitely in the 15 to 1600s. And by 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s, the violin kind of became what it is, mostly by one maker, a guy named Antonio Stradivari. He was in Italy called Cremona. And so there's two basic schools of violin making. There's Cremona and then there's Brescia. And those are both towns in Italy, only about 40 or 50 miles apart from each other. But at that time period in that history in Europe, even though they're relatively close to each other, they're under two different rules. So they both kind of migrated into very different instruments. To most people, they look at it as like, hey, it's a violin, but the fundamentals are they're pretty different,
It's like a Jets and a Sharks thing. Like they're
more or less.
yeah.
But so it's so I'm trying to think how I can. So yeah, so the violin basically has not changed much in 300 years or so. There's been small changes, mostly due to string technology. Early instruments were made with gut strings.
And that's like literally they take like animal
intestines,
right?
in the period of drying them out and stretching them, and making gut strings is an art in itself. And it sounds disgusting, but it's an art in itself.
Is that still like? Do you know like people that still do that like personally?
I don't know.
Is it even more rare than like people that hand make violins?
So this is where my biasness will come in. I feel personally there's a reason why we've moved on from that and from that style of instruments.
Yeah.
Those are referred to more as Baroque instruments, and there's nothing against Baroque instruments, but for me, it's not really where my interests lie. So you can take a modern day violin and you can build it more to a Baroque standard, and the neck geometry will be a little different, and they'll be tuned to a lower pitch. And typically they're tuned to a lower pitch, but it's not always necessarily true.
And that's Baroque, like Baroque, or Broke?
Yeah,
Like,
you had it.
okay, yeah.
So the biggest real update with violin or just stringed instruments in general is string technology, and that even then was a slow progression of kind of modernizing what we have today. And so, kind of going back to there, with people always trying to kind of reinvent the wheel, you'll have somebody come out and they'll do a really strange shaped violin, or they'll have some newfangled thing that you attach to it and it's going to change the way it vibrates, or you have somebody that glues something to the inside of the bass bar and it's going to make the vibrations bounce around differently in the inside. And so
and yet it's like they keep going back to the tried and true.
you keep coming back to the tried and true.
Man, those Italians, they did well so often throughout history. They figured out like the most core important shit.
It's cars and violins.
Galileo was Italian, wasn't he? Or am I totally up? I don't know.
Don't ask
I'm
me.
just imagining. I'm like,
I'm not an art historian.
It just seems like that's where a lot of shit happened.
Yeah,
but
an area of growth.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting that like they could have figured that shit out so long ago, and to this day, with whatever technology you want, go put a supercomputer at work and analyze the airflow out of that thing, and can't come up with anything better because it's an organic material. Wood, like you'll never get the same piece of wood twice, even from the same tree. I cut the same chunk from the same cross section. Like it's not going to be the same, right?
Yes and no. I mean, they'll be very similar, but
right, like splitting hairs at that point.
But there is. I mean, you can get as obsessive about it as you could want to. Just in in height, you may have more mineral deposits in the lower end of the tree because of gravity, and they could be cut right next to each other, but because of ever so slight differences, you may have a little difference there too. Or an inside to outside, you may have tighter grains on the narrow end of the tree, and so same tree, but I mean, is it though? And I'm not saying I abide by that rule. I don't. Yeah. But if you want to get that obsessive about it, you could sit there and say every piece of wood is unique, even if it's right next to each other. Right.
And I kind of went down the coffee rabbit hole for a little while, and after many years and so what I learned, actually, what took me the longest to learn is like my palate and my sense of smell is not anywhere near where it would need to be for me to take full advantage of specialty coffee. And then I started realizing, oh, it's the same thing with wine. It's the same thing with whiskey. Like there is somebody on the planet that has like the qualities and the sensory, just they have the nervous system and they have the palate and they have whatever to take full advantage of something. But I'm not that person. So I'm just going to go right in that. I'm in the average band, right? And so I can imagine like with wood products, I mean, like we kind of talked about earlier, like we both work with wood, but it's in very different capacities. I'm not a snob with wood. Like I like using Purple Heart because it looks good. I'm not like I'm not with like a an eyeglass, like looking at the grain and the, oh, this piece, but I know how far down that rabbit hole you can get.
Yes. And the rabbit hole ceases to never end with that stuff. And I think with kind of referring back to what you're saying about like tastes and knowing how to like process these things at the extreme level, I think that's with everything though. It just takes a lot of time to process and process and process. I don't think anybody's born with that ability to sit there and taste whiskey and really fully understand it. Some people probably have a more natural ability, but I think everything is just the ability to refine your palate and your taste and your visuals and your eye and your mind.
That is true. Like if you apply yourself to it, like you will grow and adapt to it. And
I think that also said with like craftsmen, like or people who work with food, like I think you're kind of wiring your brain to work in that manner. Like I, as a craftsman, my primary focus is instrument making. But I feel like my skills are transferable with welding or furniture making or anything of that sort. I think the same for somebody who really knows wine would probably, and I'm assuming here, would probably be able to drink whiskey and kind of understand it more deeply than someone as myself. Not to say I just like whiskey, which is not true.
Yeah, who doesn't like whiskey?
I know, but I think people have these tangible skills that as they develop over time, and once they have these skills in a nutshell, they're able to transfer them. Like somebody who knows computers, they may write code, but they may know how to do something else. Like I don't know anything about computers, so if you told me to write code and then do something, like to me, it's the same language.
Sure.
But as somebody builds a violin, if someone told me to build a piece of furniture, like it's not my forte, but I would understand what to do.
Right, because you know the principles of working with wood, and you understand joinery, and you understand like strength and.
I would take it a step further than that. I think I understand the principles of just working with my hands in general.
Okay. My dad has that quality where he'll across the room or across the warehouse look at a piece of metal, and he'll just know. His brain will do the calculation and be like, thickness, diameter. Okay, yeah, that'll work. And I don't have that because he's developed that intuition over years, but. He'll just look at a piece of metal and know exactly what it's going to be used for and where it's too weak or where it's overkill or where that's just an impressive quality in life, is to be able to assess something from afar and kind of know.
I agree. I think for me personally, I think that's a skill I'd love to keep developing and develop. Something looking at that is, as your dad can do, look at and see exactly what that is going to be, and that is a skill in itself. Something that really interests me though is so I guess I self-identify more as a craftsman before I identify as a violin maker. So I think of myself as I like to know how everything is made. I want to know how everything is made. My specialty is making musical instruments, but I make tools. I like to do metalworking. I enjoy it all, and I think that transfers to making me a better violin maker.
Right. That's a good point. I think, at least for me now, because I honestly don't really have a box that I put myself in, because I did the formal college thing. I got a degree in finance. I could write some super, super basic code. Like if I really want, like at one point I was trying to, build my own website and shopping cart and do all the JavaScript, and a lot of that stuff's templates now, so it's not actually that hard. But like I had that interest, and I was like, it's not really. So like I've put myself in a lot of different areas, but I don't really fit in a certain box. And I like what you said about, I don't call myself a violinist. I'm primarily just a craftsperson, and I think too many people nowadays, at least what you see in the general, when you walk outside or talk to people or go online, it's you're this and I also do this. Instead, it's I like to do this and I like to, live my life this way. And I think that's it's good insight to have.
I agree. I think people are too quick to put labels on what someone else is.
Right.
And I think especially when you do it as a profession, it's more of an automatic thing where you look at somebody and say, oh, they're a woodworker.
You get that piece of paper from any, school or program, whatever, and then it's built for that, right? You're supposed to call yourself whatever that piece of paper says.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. So I was thinking back. So did you like trade school, and how many years was it?
So the program I was in was 3 years.
Okay.
And
That's pretty typical, right?
So the school that I went to, there's the programs are in varying lengths. The violin program is 3 years. It's the longest program at the school. Most of the programs are 2 years. I think one program is 1 year long. That said, I would not change the experience for anything in the world. If I could go back and do it again, I would.
Yeah.
I grew so much as a human, and like I said, as a craftsperson there, my eye developed not nearly as what it is and what it will to do. But I walked into there not knowing what shape was and not knowing the difference between a line and a curve. And kind of,
you were young, right? Like, I'm trying to think, like, what did I know when I was 19? It was like,
it's embarrassing, right?
But it seems like you at least went with, you at least had the drive, and you at least had the curiosity, right? Which I think
I was really fortunate that I knew my direction very early on. I know a lot of people don't have that. I think just because of circumstances, I was able to find out what my passion was from the time of 17, 18 years old. And that is, I'm super fortunate for that. And I feel thankful for that every single day, because I go to work, but I've never worked a day in my life.
That's good, man. That is hard to come by. I know few, and the people I know that have achieved that are few and far between.
Yeah. And it's a very fortunate thing to be in. And as anybody does, they get jaded with what they do. There's days where I wake up and I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And I just want to hang out and play with my dogs. And
yeah. So there's actually a woodworker on YouTube. Do you know Matt Eslia?
I'm not familiar.
He's like in the UK.
Okay.
But he did like a 5-year apprenticeship program, and he's pretty young. He's probably mid 20s or something.
Okay.
But he's really good, and he's really talented, and he has a YouTube channel, and he builds a bunch of shit, and it's really cool. But he does, like, during quarantine and stuff, he started doing like his backyard videos. And it was just funny because one of them, he posted, he's like, yeah, I never really thought I'd see this day, but I just, like, I don't want to do my profession today. And it's like, holy shit. Like, and he's like a successful YouTuber with a skill, and just hearing people in their craft say, fuck, I don't want to get out of bed today. Like,
what? I think people forget. In my experience, I think people forget that everyone else is a human too. Yeah. And just because you do something that's interesting doesn't mean that you don't have human tendencies. Mm-hmm. And I get that all the time at work, where it's like, wow, it must be really interesting what you do. It's like, yeah, it is. But there's days where it sucks.
Yeah.
There's days when you fuck something up, and there goes 3 weeks of work, and guess what? You get to start over.
Been there.
Yeah. Isn't it fun?
That's the hardest part. Okay, so when you hit those points, have you been through it enough times where you kind of do the, all right, let's get started? Or is it, just grab that thing and just fucking, because every now, I'm a mix. I'm like, you can kind of feel when you're about to like fuck something up, and you kind of try and get it to work and it doesn't. And you're like, well, I tried at least. But there's other times where shit gets fucked up and you didn't even see it coming, and you're like, it's gone. It's across the room.
I think it depends a lot on what's going on in the shop. So if I'm at work, like if I'm at the repair shop, so I guess I should also preface, so my day job is I do restoration work. Okay. So I don't just make violin family instruments every single day. Right. My day job is I will take old instruments and I take them apart, fix what's broken on them, and put it back together. So kind of the nature of what I have to do is learn how to fix mistakes. So not so much in that circumstance, because like I have a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, and I show up and I have to do this.
Right.
But in my own personal time when I'm making instruments, if something goes wrong, I usually will walk away, because I've learned the hard way of pushing something further than it should be, and you make the mess bigger.
Yep.
And I think it's a very valuable skill to know when to start fresh.
First rule of getting stuck in a hole is stop digging, right?
It's true. It's true.
Stop digging. Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think will continue as I continue to grow as a craftsman. I think that'll something I think hopefully I've experienced this more now where it's like if I feel off, I know when to stop. And if you feel like you're just grudge working through it just to get through, that's when you're going to start making mistakes. And I think it's so crucial for people who work with their hands to have the focus. You know, how somebody has that focus, you know, it's hard to say. Like some people like to listen to music, some people like dead silent. And that's fine. But I think maintaining focus is super important. When you work with your hands, like shit happens. Like you can have an accident on the work or yourself. Yeah. And it's hard to walk away from that stuff because it's investment of time and investment of body. And like I think that's something that's not talked about often with people who work with their hands is like we're given one body as far as we know. And I think craftsmen just like fuck up their bodies on a regular basis and you just learn how to deal with it. But I think it's good to be as mindful of that as possible, to not do it excessively.
Yeah, that's been my experience over the last couple of years. I've more or less been full-time here at the shop, and yeah, you feel it. Your body, your hands, like I got a massage one time, and the person was like, he's like, yeah, there's like a little nerve bundle here that attaches near your elbow, but it's your forearm, and you know, he just went right, and I was like, whoa, fuck! Like, I didn't even know that was there. Yeah. But you realize, like, yeah, oh yeah, all day long, it's, you know, for me, it's forearms because it's metal, wood, lifting shit. Yeah. Welding is like I hold a position. You know, it's like one part of your arm is just completely solid, and then everything else moves. But then after or spraying, I mean, spraying does it. That's like a killer.
That's hard on your body.
Shoulders. Because it's like a leverage thing, which I never thought about. Like my dad, you know, he's been spraying for like almost 30 years now, just woodwork. And, you know, his shoulders are rough. And I always just thought it was like a strength thing. Like, oh, you should be like lifting weights. But it after spraying for years now, myself, it's like, oh yeah, it's like a leverage thing. It's like, I don't care how strong you are. Holding anything out, it's still a lever arm under freaking, you know, tendons and... It's rough.
It's true. There's a reason why I see a chiropractor every other week because it's just,
and that's just maintenance. That's maintenance. Not even.
No, it's awful.
It's like there's people that do yoga and massage and you know, ice baths and cryo and sauna and float tank and all this stuff just to get to the next level, right? They want to grow and keep growing. The stuff we're doing is like, it's like maintenance. Like I just don't want to get any worse or get any tighter. And
it's true. And on a regular basis, like my chiropractor's like, wow, you've been doing a lot this week. It's like, dude, you don't even know. Like for me, like my back and like, I mean, I luckily don't have a bad back, but I have times where if I'm moving a lot of machinery or whatever, like I definitely have issues. But for me, like my hands take the brunt of what I do. Yeah. Cause a lot of my tooling, it's small and I hold it between my index and my thumb. And I get the pad of my thumb will just become a giant knot. And there's days where it's like, I'm not going to hold a tool because I can't hold a tool, and it's only going to get worse, which is hard to think about. But
that's tough because your hands. I mean, I try not to think about this, but you know how many bones are in your hand? I looked it up one time. There's
a reason why hand surgeons get paid more than any other doctor.
Yeah, no kidding. That's it's like I don't even want to know how many bones are in there and how many ligaments and attachments. And you're right, you use that shit every day. And
well, I know people that have their hands insured for that reason.
I've heard about that, but that's like a legit thing. Hand insurance. It's like, I mean, I know woodworkers that, you know, are missing a digit or two.
Yeah, nothing's better than going to shake a wood dealer hand and you can only grab two fingers. You're like, oh, fuck, okay.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
It's like
it's like, I know why you're a wood dealer now.
Right. What line of work you in? Yeah, I mean, that's like Doctor Strange, you know? after he, you've seen the movie, right?
I have not actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't. Good thing I asked because he's a surgeon, and I'll just say that he has an incident with his hands, and it's just that moment of realization where it's like, I can't do my work now. What am I going to do?
And I think it's a dangerous thing because like as people develop in their hand skills, they become more comfortable, and I think people push the boundaries further. And I think as silly as it is to say, I think the people less prone to making accidents are beginners because they're so aware of everything in their body of where it is, to the point of like not being comfortable. But I mean, as I run a bandsaw every day of my life, and I have for the last 10 years. I sit there and I run stuff through a bandsaw. I don't even think about it, which is incredibly dangerous. And I see people who have run a bandsaw twice, and they sit there and they plant their legs and they sit down, they get low in their bodies, and it's like 30 press and they do 2 little cuts and like, okay, fuck. And I think it's nice. It's hard because like as somebody who's super comfortable with that, I look at them, it's like, yeah, they got a lot to learn. But at the same time, it's like, oh, maybe I have a lot to learn from them. Where it's like they are so aware of a blade spinning around in 2 wheels at hundreds of feet per minute. And that could easily snap and go through your hand. And without sounding extreme, but like it's good to like kind of take a step back and like, and I hate to say it, but close calls are good. Because a close call is not an accident, but a close call wakes you up.
Yeah.
It's awful to say.
That's, well, it's interesting because I've heard this, like I guess the mechanism behind that is like your brain, when you do something like when you're learning and you don't know it, right? Your brain's like kind of your whole body's in like the exploratory, like, oh shit, what's going on? Your adrenaline's high. It's like, oh shit, let's like take in as much information as possible, right? But once you do it over and over and over again, it's like, oh, there's no danger here.
Yeah.
So it's just not worried about it. And it's so true. Like that's like the physiological mechanism behind not paying attention is just you've done it so many times that. And then the one time you go to do it and you're like, oh, a little sore, a little tight. My elbow didn't extend just quite enough. And then something catches, right? Like but you're not thinking about it. It's just, you're just doing it. And I'm like that all the time. There's certain times where I'm like, I'm just like welding at this point it's like, I could have made that weld a little better, but I was just kind of on autopilot, you just go through it. But when you really think about it, you have to, it's like a different state of mind. And it's like close calls, been there.
I think the best ground to be on is where you know the machinery, but you're not super comfortable in the machinery. Yeah. Because I think not knowing the machinery and how it works is very dangerous, as we all know. I mean, we all have heard the horror stories. But knowing how the piece of machinery that you're working on works, and then being terrified of it, that's the place you want to be. Without sounding dramatic, but
even being terrified of it might also be too far the other way, right? Because you might be hesitating. Like I've done some things where I've hesitated just enough where something will, like with woodwork, like
a joiner
will catch. Yeah,
like a joiner.
It's like nope, I should have just been confident and just one smooth, just go. All right. But sometimes I'm a little too afraid, and that could eat. It's probably better to be too afraid than not afraid at all, but there's like it's a fine line, there's
it's dangerous.
And that's like the part of making things that doesn't really get to the surface. It's not in the advertisements, it's not in the brochure, it's not in the like everyone includes the one page, your item was made by so and so, and here's their signature. Great, but they don't know what went into it, really.
I think it's impossible to fully relay what goes into making something.
Agree.
And I especially now, kind of referring back to what we are experiencing with the immediacy and the cost effectiveness of being able to purchase something quickly. And when you tell somebody the price of what something handmade costs, and there's always that glass-eyed look of like, oh, it's like, I mean, this is my job, and I can't. And it sounds hard to say, but I I read into messages on so Instagram is my main platform.
Yeah,
Aside
me
from
too.
work.
Yeah.
And it's like when someone emails me and the very first question is how much is this? I don't respond half the time because I'm not going to tell somebody the price of my instruments, because if that's the first question you're asking, we're not going to have the same conversation.
Right.
If your first question is who plays one of your instruments, or who or why or what did you make this decision for, or what could I expect with this? But if the first question is just a very blanketed how much, and I think there's something to be said. Like I think I'm in that niche field where it's such a specialized thing where I can kind of weed people out that way. But
Yeah.
even that said, I still have professional musicians that'll ask, and there's kind of this glass-eyed look of like, oh, I didn't realize something cost that much. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I only make a few instruments a year. I don't make 30 or 40 or 50 instruments a year.
Right.
And, hourly rates cost something. And you have value. And I think it's super important to not discount yourself or discount your work. Like there are times where it's necessary, but I think having the mindset of having value and understanding the value behind of who you are as a craftsperson, it's so crucial in order to make it.
That's something that I've thought about a lot recently, is like if you take the spectrum of people, and this isn't like a judgment on anybody, it's just kind of me noticing like the way that people are in their professions. There's like on one end of the spectrum, I would say like you're like an operator, and not like the military sense of the word, but it's like you are either a first responder, maybe you are military, first responder, law enforcement, ER, nurse, medical, like whatever it is, where there's a very clear procedure that you have to follow, and follow it to the letter, and it's essentially like just follow your duty, right? There's that end of the spectrum. On the far other end, I would say, is like you're an artist, where you're not worried about money. You're doing whatever the fuck you want. You're pushing the boundaries, coming up with crazy shit that nobody understands, whether it's physical art or, digital, whatever. And then right in the middle is kind of where I've sort of seen like craftsperson is there are very clear steps that you have to follow to produce something correctly, but it is like the gray area of you have to combine, like there is the artistic element to it, and there's also the 9 to 5, somebody's paying for this, there's a deadline, it has to serve these purposes. I mean, like it's like when we installed your gate, right? It's like this thing has to close because he has to secure his property, but it also has to look good, right? So you have to balance both of those.
I really like that description, because I often find myself like trying to balance, like, am I an artist or am I a craftsperson? And I really do like that description of like the left and the right and the polar opposites. And I think personally, like identifying as a craftsman, I identify more with that. That's kind of more the mindset where I believe myself to be in. I think craftsmen can have artistic tendencies.
Sure.
I think craftsmen generally, make tools, and a tool can be anything from a thing you sit on or a thing you play or anything. But just because it's a tool does not mean it can lack visuals. I don't know. That's usually how I kind of think about it to myself. But I do really like the idea of the lefts and the rights versus purely operator or purely artist.
Yeah, it's a spectrum. Everybody, even on a daily basis, you'll float in between that. That is interesting, though. That like if you're kind of in the middle, you're making tools. It's if you're an operator, you're using tools. You're in the middle, you're making the tools, and if you're on the far artistic spectrum, what are you doing? You're giving a reason to need a tool, or you're finding out a reason. I don't know. Like that's where it gets real.
It's very gray.
It is very, and I mean, that's the unexplainable part, right? It's you don't know why you're doing something. It's just in you. I mean, that's how I've heard countless artists over and over again. Like personally that I know now and also just throughout history, it's like the artists, they always say, I was just a lightning rod. Something just went through me. I had to get it out. I don't know what it was, right? Like that's.
And I think that can be transferred to everything though, because like I know violin makers that are way more in the artist spectrum. And I know, and I'm sure chair makers are the same way. Like I have some really good buddies.
Sorry, my dad will say like, he's like, yeah, he'll look at a piece of furniture and be like, yeah, it looks good in the catalog, but I bet you that shit is wobbly or that shit's gonna snap.
It's true. And I think that's with everything. Like even looking like at how a house is made. Like you see what a house is an artist made versus like an engineer made it. No, they may serve the basic functions, but they're gonna be very different. Yeah. And I think I'm a big believer of someone's personality comes across in their work. Mm-hmm. And I just in my own field, I really see it. Like I see as somebody who is very focused and knows how to sit down and block everything out, their work is going to look very organized. Mm-hmm. And somebody who is distracted easily or can't really process a thought from beginning to end, their work is going to show that too. The corners will not, or just from purely a violin, the corners will not look right. The purfling won't be well executed. Mm-hmm. The arching may look lumpy. These are just things that I over obsess with on a daily basis. But I'm sure this is with everything, like with welding, like taking down the slag and making sure your two surfaces are clean, mm-hmm. and making sure your joints are good before you lay the bead down.
Dude, that's exactly right. When I was learning how to weld, it immediately was obvious to me that 80 to 90% of the technique of welding is like your prep work. I mean, and my dad spent a lot of time and effort getting the proper tools to cut the proper angle straight, using good saw blades. It's just like you have to make the underlying parts well in order to weld well. Mm-hmm. Like you could be the best welder in the world, but if you have shitty parts, like
you don't want to fill a 1-inch gap.
Right. I have and I can, but
you don't want to.
But you don't want to. Yeah, it's that's where that's when you start sweating a little bit during. But no, and I think if you go to a brewery, any brewery, pick one, just go in the bathroom. I guarantee you, it's going to be some nice, rustic kind of farmhouse style metal bathroom, and just look at the welds. And you can see some of them will be, wow, that's nice, smooth, even. Others will just be like, wow, they just got that shit done and got out of there.
It's true. When I see it, woodworking and furniture making, and even though I don't identify as a furniture maker, I have a lot of close friends who are great furniture makers. And
are you into all the complex joinery? Because all I see I swear to God, like I love Instagram. I love it as a platform. I think it's done a lot of good for people, mm-hmm. their businesses, it provides some incentive to like keep being better. But God damn it, I also hate it. Instagram, I mean, you go on there and it's all like these, perfect like guy on the top of a mountainside drinking stream water, cutting a perfect, mitered, joint in a piece of furniture and, polishing it. And he's like, it's $80,000 and I'm making a living doing that. Like, that's all I see now. It's the algorithm. I don't know.
That doesn't bother me as much as if I see one more river table, I'm going to shoot myself. I literally, one more river table and I'm going to die.
A buddy of mine was into the epoxy thing back in like 2007.
Oh, early.
Yes. And so he keeps bringing this up. He's like, man, I was into that shit before it got popular and then I got out of it. It's like, good.
I have so many people. They're like, we're going to go down this tangent now. I think there's a danger with people who have video camera and a platform mm-hmm. to post their work. And they can easily identify as a craftsman because a quote unquote layman might be able to not be able to do the same thing. And they automatically assume, they know how to do something that I don't know how to do. So they're a craftsman.
Right.
And I think like the whole maker movement, it's good. Mm-hmm. But I think it also discredits people who legitimately work with their hands for a living.
Right. Because it's like both of them at the end of the day can say, hey, I made something.
Yeah.
But one of them, the quality.
There's no question.
Yeah.
And it's hard because like you go on YouTube and you see people who have millions of views, and you look at what they made. It's like, dude, I can make that in my sleep, and it'd make it better.
Right.
But you're not the one getting the credit. And granted, like there's something to be said for to go through the process of videography, and that's something I don't have interest in doing, and I have so much respect for that. But it seems it's just difficult because marketing and marketing is such an important tool. And seeing people who have good marketers but are not good craftsmen get recognized for being good craftsmen, when it's like no, let's draw the lines where they are. Like, you are a great marketer and you're great at self-promoting, but I don't think identifying as a craftsman is totally necessary.
Right. Yeah, and see, and I'm also torn on that because on one hand it's like cool. There's people out there that are getting up every day, trying to, put out some content, learn some new skills, maybe they're genuinely trying, right? Is good. And the hard part about it is like the YouTube audience, I think, myself included, it's like WALL-E. It's like we're living in WALL-E, the precursor to WALL-E, where they're all in the spaceship and they all just like that, the food, and they're just sitting there. And it's sort of like the dissociation between physical output and input, right? It's like once your output goes down, your input just goes up, and your skill level also goes down. And I don't want to knock people on YouTube, like you said, that maybe they're not the most professional, or maybe they don't sell what they're actually making. They just make money on advertisements from Squarespace because everything's sponsored by Squarespace
or Raid.
Or I mean, hey, this podcast was sponsored by me because I made this table and I paid for all this myself.
Raid Shadow Legends brought to you by another.
Right.
If I hear another one of those, it's like, dude, I'm not going to play your video game.
Right. And so, but the key there is like how, and this is a question that I've been asking myself lately, is how do we show people what is good quality, what is good work, what is good workmanship, what is a good end product, or even just to recognize, hey, this is somebody that's X meters away from their starting point. So yeah, they might not be producing the best work, but you should give them credit for what they have done, right? That's, as somebody who makes something, it's like I know my own kind of general area of expertise, but if complex woodworking, I don't know. Like, if it looks good, it's probably good. If it doesn't rattle loose.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, it comes down to educating. Like, how are you going to educate the audience? Yeah. And I think there are people out there, I mean, specifically on YouTube, that do really good work, and I think they do get views. And I think the most advantageous thing to encourage more growth as far as the watcher is for there to be more people on those platforms that know what they're doing. I mean, so when I look stuff up, I'll see like Miller Welding's YouTube channel, or the big companies, right? Pick whatever. Even like Cerakote, they have a pretty good YouTube channel. They obviously make money from their training program that you fly out to and do. And so obviously they don't post like the full on, 8-hour course on YouTube, because then nobody would go to the training course. So they would just assume they could learn it from YouTube, which you can and you can't, right? Like, it's always better to work with an instructor hands-on. But it seems like there's a divide maybe between like these, the companies with the big budgets and the big name brands that have YouTube channels, but then there's also the makers. But is there like the equivalent of like a trade school in YouTube that you've seen, where it's like, hey, there's some level of accreditation and they know what they're doing, but they're also not just trying to push a product? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of variables on the YouTube channels. I think there's people who make product and they do it. And I think YouTube channels can be broken down, as far as just crafts, I think it can be broken down into 3 subcategories. There's the people who are making product at an incredibly high level, and they have decent videos to go along with it. They don't spend their energy into awesome editing and really interesting things.
Right.
And they're more there to make product and then just show a process of how it's done. Then there's the people who are showing how to make product. And that is their expertise of showing like, hey, this is how I'm going to run a table saw. This is how I'm going to run a lathe. This is how I'm going to run a milling machine. And that is the focus of the channel. And then you have the people that are artists with their videography, and they care more about having really cool music that's synced up to how the hammer's blowing than they do about having something that's a really awesome product.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, their work is their video.
Right.
And that's the sexy factor. Like that's what people like to watch. Nobody wants to watch some guy like on like 5 times fast, like the speed of just like watching him like run a bunch of things to a table saw. Like that's not cool.
Right.
Like nobody wants to watch nobody has any interest in watching me just like process wood for a day. Like no one wants to watch me resaw ribs. Like that's not fun.
That's and that's also probably part of the Instagram effect, right? Where you see, you know, here's the work in progress shot, and it's perfect, right? And I'll do it too, right? It's like I don't want to show like the fucking messy, like stuff I fucked up in the corner. Like I don't want to show all that.
Slide it to the side,
right? It's like slide to the side. You know, I got this. Okay, Bing, work in progress. You know, Bing, finished product. It looks great.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's like that's 5% of it at the very top, and all of the legwork below that was just slogging through stuff that is nobody wants to watch.
Well, and I think you and I are both contributing to the instant gratification of it, because whether we want to agree or not, like we are in the day of instant gratification.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't want to wait for something, they get online and they Google it. And I can guarantee they'll find something that'll fit their needs in 5 minutes.
Right. And it'll be cheaper.
It'll be cheaper.
and it'll get there in 2 days with free shipping.
Free Amazon Prime.
That's it.
And I think the tricky thing is to like how to navigate your clientele base. Like if that's the person you're going for, then you need to change things.
Right.
But if you're going for the person that cares about craftsmanship and artistry and something that's made to a quality standard that they're not going to be able to buy on Amazon, then I don't know. It's hard to navigate. And there's something to be said about YouTube being a platform of like getting names out there. Like one of my friends, his name's Kyle Toth, and he went to the school that I went to, and he has a successful YouTube channel. But he is not using it in a fashion of like the videography is like the next level of like where it's the music is synced and like all this stuff. It's like, no, he's working his ass off, and it shows, and it's great. But then it's also created this platform for him to be able to sell product because people now know who he is.
That's like that's the finish line right there, is once you have like enough people that know you. And I don't know if you've read Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans.
I've heard essay. I've never read it, but I've heard of.
The gist is, and I honestly I haven't read the whole thing straight through yet. I've like skimmed it. I've gone back and read certain parts of it. But the point is, like, he's like, you don't need millions of viewers and fans and people. You need a handful of people that really like what you do.
Yeah,
that'll talk about you, and you start there. You don't have to sell out to anything. But once you do have that core group of fans, whether they're customers or not, you just need a core group, and then it's going to build on itself. And that's hard. That's hard to get. So it sounds like your friend, like it's good that he's got that, and YouTube's great for reaching more people than you could ever, shake hands with in person. Right.
Yeah, it's true. I think there's something to be said for marketing is the most important tool for an artist or a craftsman. Yeah. Because you can be the world's best artist, but if you're in a closet and nobody sees your work, what does it matter?
It'll be worth millions once you're dead.
Yeah. And it's like, that's great when you're dead, but like, I want to enjoy my life.
Yeah, it's like I want to cut it off about 10 years earlier. Yeah. I'll coast, I'll take a haircut off the, the value I could get to, but I'd rather just coast those last 10, just cruise. And
I have some mentors that they do a cool thing where, arguably things we make should go up in value. Mm-hmm. And so they bankroll their stuff as far as they make 9 products for the public and 1 product for themselves. And that sits as inventory for when they retire. hopefully it's gone up in value. And this might be very niche. It's like woodworking or like violin making in particular. But I know people that will have an instrument every year that's put in a safe and they don't touch it for 40 years. And when they retire, they can pull things out once in a while and say, hey, I still have inventory.
If you're in the Pimentel family or you're in a family, right? Because I mean, a lot of this stuff was, one guy learned it or one woman learned it and handed it down, right? And then it becomes a family thing, and that's kind of why you see, X product by family. It's because it's rare and it's somebody figured it out. And how many people do you think die trying?
A lot.
That's the thing I think about all the time. I'm like,
I think
for every successful name that you see, it's like there's got to be at least 10 or 100 that die trying.
Well, even in my school, like, it's hard because like I was in a program with some amazing people, and a lot of them have done things when they've left the school and the program, and they've gone on to have successful careers. But some people, for whatever reason, it didn't work out, or it hasn't worked out, or it's not working out. And that could be a combination of opportunity, ability to grasp opportunity, ability to process opportunity, or not making opportunity. I think there's a lot of things that go into it. Like I feel super fortunate that I've had a relatively successful career so far. And I have a lot of friends that, I think can relate to that. But it's hard, seeing somebody that you care a lot about that, they do great work.
Yeah.
But why are they not, reaching that next milestone? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know if it's easy to sit down and say what the answer is.
It's different for everybody. That's as much as I know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of in that same boat right now. Like, I've tried to branch out on a few different things over the last couple of years, and nothing's really like stuck, right?
Yeah.
But I can fall back on just working, and luckily it's like I could fall back into a family business, which is I'm so fortunate to have.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would just be kind of whatever, a millennial looking for a job or just on the job market, right? Which now, holy fuck, that is tough, right? So like, it's like if I ever complain, slap me, because I have no right to, right? Like I have way more at my resources that I can fall back on. But it's hard. It's like you don't know what it is. You don't know if it's presentation, marketing, ambition. I'm pretty introverted, and I've always thought that's, and it's less of a classification, it's less of a label than it is like, no, I literally, like when I go outside and talk to people, it's like just your stress hormones, just, it's like, I can't control it. Like I know logically it shouldn't be that way, but is that why, I'm not promoting as much? Is that why? But you see it in different people. So you see people that are introverts that do really well. You see people that are extroverts that do really well. So it's obviously not just one factor.
It's true. I think self-promotion goes a long way with that, and being able to successfully self-promote. Like for myself, like I'm okay at it. I'm not great at self-promoting.
How do you have a main website, or do you just do Instagram? And
so I had a website, and I definitely had traffic on it, but it kind of it lapsed, like my domain name and all that stuff, and it lapsed, and I never got it going again. I'm fortunate that the company I work for here in Albuquerque, they have a huge website, and my name is on that website, and that definitely helps.
So do you get like contracts through them, or is it still through like who you work for, or is it like kind of your name, or is it their name? That's
so it depends greatly what I'm doing. Okay. So if I am doing restoration work, it's all through the company.
Okay. Yeah.
Even with when I make new instruments, it's all through the company. I if somebody comes to me and say, hey, I want to commission an instrument from you, it's like, awesome. Call up so and so at the shop, and they'll help you get going. And it has its pros and cons. I mean, it's nice. I'm one that doesn't do well with having direct contact with customers. I enjoy a little bit of the promotion of like showing people like what I can do for work and kind of showing people like what the projects I'm working on. But when it comes down to sitting and talking to somebody on the phone for 5 hours a day, it's like I don't have that capacity in myself. Like I don't feel like, similarly, I'm not super extroverted. I'm a craftsperson. I like to sit in my shop and work on my project and kind of just block out. And so, you know, for me, that's a decision that I've made. Like I kind of navigate that through that situation. And for me, it works out really well where I'm relying on this company. And granted, it's a great company to work for, so I never have to worry about it.
That's good.
But it has, you know, it has its drawbacks, as everything does.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we were talking earlier before the show, like being flexible now and having something to fall back on is everything.
It's true. I think it's interesting because, you know, there's so many different fields of craft and like people who work with their hands and art. And I think it's good to be flexible. And like for myself, I have, and just in my own industry, like my clients are musicians and people who are musicians, they don't have work right now. And they're not going to be sitting down and wanting to say, hey, I want to get my bass. I want $10,000 worth of work done to my bass, or I'm not going to go buy a brand new instrument tomorrow. And I think it's good to be flexible with like, okay, so we've lessened want bass repairs. We're now going to need bass repairs. And, you know, luckily things like that still happen, but it's, you know, hopefully things continue to keep happening. But like worst comes to worst, like I said, I'll hang drywall. I'll build cabinets. I have a table saw. I mean, I can weld, not well, but I can weld. So if somebody needs me to show up to the house and weld their gate, I'm like, yeah, I'll do it.
Right.
So I think there's a lot to be said for a self-sufficient craftsman. I think a lot of people rely on the company that they work for and having the tools that they use at their company or their boss or whatever. Yeah. And something that's always been a huge goal of mine is that when I got started, like I wanted to own my own stuff because I want to be turnkey if anything ever happens. If for whatever reason I need to go home and I have a mill and I have a lathe, and between a mill and a lathe and a table saw, you can literally do anything you want in the world. Yeah. And to me, that's like that is a comfort. Like if someone needs a part made, like I can make that part.
Right.
If someone needs something turned down because the diameter's too big, or if someone needs me to make a box, like cool, I'll make you a box.
Right. And that's everything now is like everything has gotten so specialized that nobody can fix their own stuff because it's either cheaper to buy their own or it's too complicated to even take the cover off. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we have a mill here, but we mainly use it for like drilling and, you know, some milling operations. But a friend of mine, Jesse, he's a machinist at the labs, and he did the whole journeyman program. And he actually helped me out. I had these titanium bottle openers made.
Oh, cool.
And so he helped me just dial everything in. He's like, yep, just do this, this, and this. And
awesome.
So it was kind of cool because, you know, we have a mill here, which, you know, we were, none of us, like either my dad or I, like went to school and learned how to use all the capabilities it offers, right? But luckily we knew somebody who's like, you know, oh yeah, we can, you know, here, you know, this is how you set it up, speeds, feeds, like all that stuff.
I think that once it down comes to being a craftsperson, like, yeah, you may not know how to use the tool 100%, but with some basic instruction, you're not starting from zero.
Right.
You know the fundamentals of machine. You know your X, Y, and Z, and you know you have feed depth and feed of rate of feed. Right. And it's like just knowing these basic fundamentals, like you can figure things out.
Right. Or like I did yesterday, you know, you break a drill bit and you're like, oh, obviously I should have changed this.
Yeah.
I know why, you know, but it's like you'll keep smoking parts every day, but you'll at least have some idea why.
Yeah, it's
You'll
true.
never be there like, huh, why did this happen?
I mean, because like you have to think about it, like somebody at some point in time, they had to make it up.
Right.
And
dude, that's like who made the tools, right?
And that, well, and I think about all the time, because I mean, for me, like I obsess over old machinery. I think it's one of the coolest things. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of old machinery here in New Mexico. And when I see like early lathes, like lathes from like 1850s, it's like, how was that made? Like, because once you have one, you can make the next, and you can make the
Right.
next. But it's like, okay, an early lathe and early milling machine, like, what made those things? Like, was a guy at the file sitting there, and like a foundry, and like, I mean, it blows my mind. Like the chicken and the egg. It's like, what happened?
Yeah, and that's like the first principles thing. It's like, how do I make a machine that makes perfect parts, but it needs perfect parts to make the machine?
Yeah,
And then you kind of use like first principles of like, well, something rotating. Even if the thing itself is oblong, there is a spot where it will rotate in a perfect circle, more or less. Like more or less meaning like thousands. Like they probably couldn't hold a 10,000th, tolerance back in the 1800s, but they got pretty fucking close.
Yeah.
Close enough to make a mill, right? And so it's like, okay, now I have this part that's flat, which will keep everything else flat and straight. And yeah, I don't know what geniuses and psychos figured that out back then. But
that's largely why I have so much respect for early manufacturing and early craft, because these are the guys that did it. And I mean, like I said earlier, like a pattern maker, he went off drawings and made the negatives for a foundry. I mean,
Right.
all he had was a block of wood and some hand tools, and he made the shape.
right.
And then through the process of like going through a foundry, and them casting all the parts and then assembling things, and then it's just the whole process of like manufacturing back then. It was so different, and I think there's so much. I think there's so much to be learned about looking into the past about how things are made, because so much of modern craftsmen. I think a large part of why modern craftsmen may not be achieving the fullest potentials because they're starting from Z, when really you go back and look at A.
Yeah.
Like what does a foundry do? Like, how important is that? Like, you're not just going to get a raw chunk of material and then do your part. It's like, no, you're going to get something made that's close to your part. But then how do you get something that's made close to your part? And it's like, there's so many steps that go into it.
Yeah, and that's like a good point, because now some people like think stuff that I do, this is titanium, I work with carbon fiber. I just order that stuff online, or I go, I know where to get it. It's not that hard. I didn't fucking make that. Like, I didn't pull that ore out of the ground and purify it. So honestly, it's like, I don't think anything I do is that crazy, but some people look at stuff and they're like, whoa, that's, so crazy. Like, how'd you, like, anybody can get this stuff now. That's like the beauty of modern manufacturing. And I mean, like, I have these carbon plates here, which I'd never in a million billion years, I would never evolve to any kind of, intelligence would figure out how to make carbon strands, which are, 10,000th of an inch thick, and weave it and make a plate, and like, but yeah, they figured that out. You can just buy that now. Like, it's
wild.
It's just, that to me is like, how, like you said, starting from Z, you can't even begin to like unpack what that means to just hold a piece of woven carbon fiber in your hand. All the eons of technology that went into just producing that. I mean, carbon's like one of the most fundamental substances in, on the earth and everything, in organic life. And we just make sheets out of it now. Yeah. Like,
it's incredible to
blows
think about.
my mind.
It's incredible to think about. And I think, but at least having the understanding of what goes into it is super important.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people don't even have the understanding of like what goes into manufacturing metal. Like what's the process of making square tubing, or how is cold rolled steel made? And just understanding like the process of it can kind of encourage your ability to do whatever you need to do out of it.
Yeah.
Like knowing the fundamentals. It's like buying pasta versus making your own. Like, you don't have to buy pasta every time, but at least you'll know what goes into it.
Right. Have you been to Tulipani or gotten their stuff here in town? It is good.
Is it?
Yeah. It's like Tulipani, a tiny pasta shop, handmade stuff.
Really?
Oof, it's good. Yeah.
Check it out.
They, I think it's like a woman owns it. I think she had a spot in Sawmill.
Okay.
Of course, they opened right before COVID.
The world's shut down.
Yeah, I think you can still pick their stuff up though. But it's funny. I was gonna say, like, I think for the everyday person who maybe doesn't make anything with their hands, your closest like experience to this is go to a restaurant, because somebody made that with their hands.
Yeah.
And that's why you pay way more at a restaurant than you do if you made it yourself, because you know, can't make it as good as they
true.
can.
It's so true.
Typically.
No, it's so true. I think people just, I think people just lose sight of like what it takes to make with your hands.
Yeah.
Like for example, here's a great example. And I think, okay, well, let me also tangent this by saying, I think people who work with their hands, they're not looked at in society as like, that's their job. That's just like what they do. So for example, my one of my mentors in New York, he had a lawyer send me an email, really nice email, said, "Oh, I really admire what you do. I'd love just to come sit and watch for a day." And, you know, on the surface, oh, that sounds nice. The guy's interested in what I'm doing. But when you read into it, it's like, okay, so this is my job. Like, I love my job, but this is my job. So why don't I text or email him and say, hey, that's okay, but how about I come sit in one of your law proceedings for a day?
Right.
And, you know, when you think about it in that manner, it's like, oh, it kind of puts in perspective where it's like, oh, yeah, this is not just something that the guy does. It's like, this is like what he does to put food in his mouth. And, you know, it's super enjoyable, and we make things, and like, it's awesome. Like, you and I can look at something and say, okay, I may not know 100% how to make it, but I have an idea how it's made.
Right.
And it's fortunate, but it's hard. I think it comes down to like discrediting yourself. Like don't discount your work.
Yeah.
Don't sit there and say, oh yeah, come on, just come hang out. It's like, that's your job. Like,
Right.
don't just offer that service up for free.
Right. I mean, it's like you can fly with the Blue Angels, but you got to pay for it or know somebody,
Yeah.
you know, and they're not actually, you know, like that's sort of that's sort of like the difference between going back and, you know, seeing how the sausage is made versus like just going to the meat stand at the farmer's market. Like, oh, this is, you know.
Yeah. It's artisanal sausage. I'm like, tasty.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot of pride in things that are handmade. And I think you're right that self-promotion is very hard to do because you're walking a very, it's like I've seen those mountain biking videos where they ride like those spines, those mountain spines, and they're just like on those skinny ass, like, that's kind of what it is like as an artist. Like if you go too far to one side, you'll never go anywhere because you won't promote yourself.
Yeah.
But if people sniff out an ego, or if you're pretentious at all, it goes the other way. It's like, no, they're not going to.
It's easy to burn your bridges.
Right. And that's, it's such a fine line. That's hard.
I think as a person that works in my hands, like as I have friends in the industry, I don't think I can sit there and say that the people that I know are the most successful are necessarily the best people who are working with their hands. I think they're just the best self promoters.
Right.
Like I know people who are just incredibly gifted. They have hand tools and hand tool skills where just like they'll just blow your mind, but nobody knows who they are because they don't know how to sit there and say, hey, this is me, world. Like, come look at me.
Yeah. You know, one thing that's kind of stuck with me is, I don't know what I was watching, but it was like a keynote on YouTube. And, you know, the main takeaway was like, tell the world what you want. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And yet, for whatever reason, most people don't. Myself, and it's sort of like it's like every day you kind of have to wake up and like, at least think about what you want, and at least tell people that you think are receptive to it what you want.
Yeah.
But that's hard, you know. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like you don't want to seem vain, or you just don't like we started off talking about imposter syndrome. You know, it's either that or it's being too vain or some weird combination, you know. And I don't know what that's like in like in the instrument world.
It's there. I think for me though, there's no substitute for really hard work.
Yeah.
And I think you just have to be willing to put in 70-hour work weeks, as ridiculous as that seems, because it is ridiculous. But
yeah.
I think there's kind of a lot of like music, like just musicians and craftsmen. I think there's a period of 10 years, typically in someone's life, when they're kind of getting their feet going, where you will spend 80-hour, 70-hour work weeks of just working on your craft
And feel like you're getting nowhere.
I feel like you're getting nowhere. And I mean, I feel like I'm just now starting to come out of this time period where I didn't have friends. I didn't have, my social connections were greatly reduced because I went to work at 9 a.m. morning, came home at 6 p.m., put some food in my mouth, and then went down to my workshop, and I worked for another 4 or 5 hours that night.
Yeah.
And that was just Monday through Friday. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I woke up, walked into my workshop, and I was there for 12 hours a day.
Right.
And I think it's easy for people to sit there and be jealous about what someone else has. But, unless someone's willing to put the work in to get what they have, it's like, what does it matter?
Right.
Because, working that much, it sucks, but it's what you have to do. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, and that's the type of thing is like, do not tell me that ahead of time. Do not tell me that, hey, you're going to have to put in 10 years and you're going to get nowhere. But in 10 years, you'll be an overnight success. 10 years in the making, right?
And I think, I mean, for me, though, it's never been like a thing like I have to put these 10 years in. It's just like it's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, you were going no matter what.
Yeah. And I think that's partially like what the passion is. Because passion is just no substitute for it. Or if someone wants to do it, they're going to do it. You can help them out or you can just not do it, but they'll figure it out.
That does seem like the way things are, doesn't it? When you think about the people that got to where they are, it's like they wouldn't have stopped. They wouldn't have stopped if you tried.
Yeah. And one of my friends in the industry, he and I have talked about it before. It's like, it's not so much that there's trade secrets. Like there's not like, oh, I can't tell somebody. But there's a little bit of stuff that you don't want to give everybody all the information you have.
Because they'll just go and start a YouTube channel.
Yeah,
and
then
you'll be more successful than you are.
Right. And there's a little bit of a hesitation with that. But I think like if, as he says, like, look, if someone's coming along and if they really know what's going on, help them out. Like if they have the passion and the drive and it's obvious that they want to do, like give them the push.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to give them the push. If someone has that, like, that gumption of like, I don't care if you help me out or not. Like, it's going to be what it is.
Right. Yeah, man, there's so much to the fine art of making something with your hands. I think we, even in an hour or two or three, we just barely scratched the surface. You got to go or you got to get out of here or what?
I'm good with whatever. I should get out of here at some point. I have work tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Well, any closing thoughts? I guess we'll kind of pause there. I'm sure we'll do this again, but
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's really cool to touch base on kind of, what you do for a living because we've only touched base like kind of in a business sense. Right. But yeah, it's like a lot of similarities, and we kind of both understand what it's like to just go work in a shop for hours and hours. And I think you did a good job of kind of explaining how there's the same quality in building anything, and it's you can recognize it. It's like a gun recognizes another gun, right? It's no matter what it is, specifically. But I'm still fascinated by music. I mean, I think there's so much to it beyond. I mean, it's like with furniture. At the end of the day, it's like you're gonna sit at the fucking table and eat, right? That's it. You're gonna sit on the chair. You're gonna go sleep in your bed.
Yeah.
But music is there's just so many layers to it. Also the craft of the instrument. But I think, like you said, it's the craftsman in the middle. They make the tools, and the artists take those tools and they make something that who the fuck knows what it is.
Yeah.
But we all enjoy it.
It's true. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't trade what I do for anything in the world.
Yeah, don't. You're very good at it. I mean, we'll have to bring in some. Or I'll include some photos or something in the like in the release, and
that sounds good.
Some finished pieces because like your work is really crazy and detailed, and I was telling you earlier, I'll make a wooden top and I'll make it square and straight and flat, but your stuff is so much more complicated that it's just cool to look at. And so we'll post your Instagram account.
Don't discredit your work.
Right.
You're doing it.
Don't discredit anything. Yeah, it's true.
Your work is totally different, and you can't compare apples to oranges.
Fair enough.
Because I think what you guys do is awesome. I think working with metal and being able to make something that's like structure and holds load is just like, I think it's awesome. So
Yeah.
don't discredit what you do.
Well, yeah, we appreciate it, and I think we'll definitely have to sit down again, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we
Love it.
talk about more whatever.
I can talk about craft for until I'm blue in the face.
Man, and I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. I think I'm still making my way through the process of those 10 years or however long it takes, but still like early on in that process. So it's cool to just sit down and kind of connect over that. And
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was
like
a lot of fun.
like you said, there's not a lot of people that are doing it. Do you have any tips for people that might have an inkling, like, hey, I want to work with my hands, and what should I do? Should I go straight to YouTube, or should you buy some tools or something?
YouTube is a great resource. I mean, I think you and I are like on the tip of the generation where it wasn't really as much around when we were getting started on it. And I think if I had it now, it'd be very different. I still am a firm believer of like find a shop, something you're interested in, like a machine shop or a wood shop, or just find a professional and like ask like, can I just come sweep your floors once a week? And like just being in that environment, you're going to learn. Yeah. And I did that. I swept floors, and I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think that's the way to get your foot in the door of learning. And like, yeah, YouTube is great, but there's no substitute for firsthand experience of somebody who's been doing it their entire life.
Yeah, agree. YouTube is great for that inspiration. It's like, oh, hey, this is where I want to learn about. Cool. Let me go find somebody.
Yeah.
It's good advice. Where can people find you if you want to be found, if you want your portfolio to be discovered?
So my Instagram is EW Davenport Violins. That's probably the best way to reach out to me and bug me and ask me all the questions that you don't want the answers to.
That'll be a link you can click through. And no website right now, but
no website right now, but
possibly in the
future.
Because now's the time to do it, man. Everybody is sitting at
no website at the moment. Yeah, it could happen.
Could happen. All right. Well, maybe next time. Maybe
next time.
But Instagram is a great platform for now, and
that's where all my photos of my work are. And I post pictures of the tools I make and the instruments I make up there too. So
cool. Thanks, Evan.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Do it again.
Next time we'll crack some whiskey or who knows, but that'll be it for today. So
sounds good.
Peace.
Awesome.
Right on.